This is the Watchmen podcast on TV Podcast Industries, where we're looking at episode 2, Martial Feats of Comanche Horsemanship. Welcome back, watchers. This is TV Podcast Industries, and you're listening to the Watchmen podcast, episode 2, Martial Feats of Comanche Horsemanship. I'm one of your hosts, Chris.
Well done for getting that right first time, Chris. I thought you were going to get it wrong. I'm Derek, one of your other hosts.
Hi there, fellow watchers, and I am the third and final host, John. Yes, welcome back to the Watchmen.
Yes, thank you so much, because Martial Feats of Comanche Horsemanship is a mouthful and a half, and I've only had to say it 38 times.
Yes, it's a good job it's not marital feats of the Comanche Horsemanship.
Definitely.
That might be an R-rated series.
It might also be a mouthful.
I also just thought it was marital feat of Comanche Horsemanship, and then I was like, what is a marital feat? Like, not even feats, like a feat. I was like, this is a weird one, but okay, I'm gonna roll with it.
I think Quentin Tarantino likes those, doesn't he? For marital feats.
He does.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, fellow watchers, and welcome back to this amazing review of episode 2 of The Watchmen. You are right here with TV Podcast Industries, and we want you to be here going forward for the rest of this season. So make sure you pop over to our website at tvpodcastindustry.com to subscribe to any Minutemen or Crime Buster podcast player. You can also get us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or any other good one too.
Yes, we have our own feed for the Watchmen podcast on Spotify and on iTunes now. I didn't have that when we put out our first episode, but it is available now over on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and I think on Stitcher as well, have a Watchmen podcast. Otherwise, as Chris said, subscribe to TV Podcast Industries to get everything we talk about, not just the Watchmen.
And yes, we have a special feedback episode after each of our main review episodes. We want to hear your thoughts. You can leave a voicemail so we hear your dulcet tones on this podcast over on tvpodcastindustries.com, or you can send us an email with your feedback at tvpodcastindustries.com. We also have a fantastic group over on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/TV Podcast Industries, where you can follow along with us, give us your thoughts, your opinions, so any cool things you see around the world. Just make sure you only put your feedback in our spoiler-filled posts. But gentlemen, I think that kind of gives us the main kind of bits of the palaver where we have to go through each episode. I really want to talk about this episode, so do we want to get into it?
Definitely. We only go through that because we may have some new listeners that may not know exactly how we do our podcast, because we do it slightly differently each time that we talk about new shows as well. So with these ones, we do have the episodes in advance, so we're recording our podcast ahead of anybody seeing them. And as Chris said, we're going to be doing our feedback episodes if we get enough feedback in about the episodes. We're kind of crossing fingers and hoping loads of people will be watching along with us, of course. So if you have any thoughts about the episode, just even tell us what you think of it, whether you like it or not. Email them and send them in to us exactly at the details that Chris said. But let's get into the episode details.
Yeah, well, I think I may be the fascist here on the fact that we have to always say where people can find us.
Absolutely.
That's coming from Game Over Greggy.
It certainly is, from Greg Miller, yes. And what time do people have to get their feedback in, John?
Yes, you can send your feedback in by 2 minutes to midday on every Wednesday.
Yes, exactly. And hopefully we'll have the podcast out a little bit after that. Let's get into the details of this episode. Once again, the episode was written by Damon Lindelof, this time with Nick Cuse. Nick Cuse was a staff writer on The Leftovers, an excellent show that we've talked about a couple of times on the podcast here from Damon Lindelof as well. He wrote 2 full episodes of the show himself and was a staff writer on 9 episodes of the show as well. On this show, over on Watchmen, he's written this episode, and he also gets a full writer's credit on the finale of the season. So obviously someone that's pretty trusted with these characters and his ideas for the episodes.
Yeah, it's an interesting one to see that usually it's the showrunner. So in this case, just being Damon kind of doing the first and the end. And it's what we've seen in like a lot of the Marvel Netflix shows, what we've seen in a lot of the DC shows. So it's strange to see that Nick is back as well. So obviously he works quite well with Damon. And it'd be interesting to see what parts of episode 1 and 2 carry over those threads that are so important in the finale.
Exactly. And as we said, there's only 9 episodes in this season, and it is a writer's room. As Damon Lindelof has really stated, this is a whole room full of people that have come together for these episodes. So the writer's credit is usually the person that breaks the story. So perhaps Nick's input on the final episode gives him a bigger credit. then just that. Of course, the final episode hasn't been released yet, so we don't know for definite the final credits, so we'll see those as the episodes come up, but cool to see that he's coming back for that episode anyway. The episode was once again directed by Nicole Kassell. She did episode 1 and back for the episode here. John, do you want to give us the official description for the episode?
Sure. As Angela relives haunting memories of an attack on her family, she detains a mysterious man who claims responsibility for Tulsa's most recent murder. An original play is performed for an audience of one.
Yeah, that was a weird moment, wasn't it?
It was more than weird. There's no way. I was like slowly watching it going, this is getting straight. This is getting, what the hell? And then the reveal, I was like, we called it. I'm happy about that, but also this is so damn strange.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this episode was quite thready. There seems to be a lot of threads being sort of initially woven for the rest of the series, and we'll see how it goes. A lot of intrigue. So I thought that was pretty good, for sure. So I really liked that. It really is making me think, what the hell is going on? I think a bit like Angela Abar at the end of this.
Exactly. And I do want to apologize before John continues. As our regular listeners know, we can't curse in the podcast, unfortunately, but I think both myself and John definitely, when we watched the episode, said almost word for word the WTF that Angela Abar had at the end of the episode. So
yeah, it's definitely the same sentiment as Angela. Let's get on our countdown to midnight with our first 5 minutes to midnight.
And yes, we have a brand new structure for our Watchmen podcast. We're going to choose our top 3 moments in our countdown to 2 minutes to midnight. So our biggest point of the episode is our 5 minutes to midnight. Middle is the 4 minutes to midnight. And our final discussion will be our 3 minutes to midnight. We'll end our chat at 2 minutes to midnight because, like any good Belle at the Ball or Cinderella, we need to be home by midnight. Otherwise we turn into a pumpkin. Fitting that it's coming up to Halloween.
Well, that and the doomsday clock, the official end of the world, is currently set at 2 minutes to midnight, yes.
Yeah, I like my Cinderella one more. But what is that I hear? The doomsday clock is approaching.
The doomsday clock has been set to 5 minutes to midnight.
So, gentlemen, we are at 5 minutes to midnight. What was your first big point that you want to talk about? John, kick us off.
Well, my big point is certainly the poor wardrobe choice at Judd Crawford's house. Yes, that kind of Grandmaster KKK type outfit there, hung up, backlit, frontlit, looking like it's in a museum to some degree, but with the sheriff or police badge there on the side. Yeah, I thought this was kind of fairly on the nose, but it just added to a bit of mystery, maybe suspicion. You know, is this Judge Crawford's? Was he a part of that previous sort of group? I can't necessarily say it's the Rorschach or the 7th Cavalry, but certainly, you know, from the first episode we saw 1921 Tulsa with the Greenwood Massacre in Tulsa. Was it a family member who used to be that and he's retained it for some reason? Is it his? I'd also have the question of, or is it his wife's? And the reason why I say that is because I feel that the 7th Cavalry leader has very distinctive eyes. They're quite blue, and I think his wife does too. So I'm not entirely sure. I might be barking up the wrong tree there.
Interesting.
But I wonder, is it his wife's? I'm thinking, if it is Judd Crawford's, was it some kind of way to infiltrate into the 7th Cavalry? So it was kind of, you know, dangerous missions. It's not because he believes in that ideology, or in some ways then was it planted? Because, you know, this is all set up, and it's quite on the nose from Will, who's been captured by Angela, and has been taken back to her bakery, and sort of secure detention. He's kind of arrested, but not fully arrested. Yeah. And he says, you know, Judge Crawford does have skeletons in the closet, and ultimately when she's there for the wake, for his funeral, she finds more than a skeleton, a rather big bogeyman in the shape of this sort of, you know, that Grandmaster KKK outfit.
Although Will does seem quite surprised that she took the idea of having skeletons in his closet literally and went and checked out his closet. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
I know I said skeletons in his closet, but that is a figure of speech kind of thing. You know?
Definitely. But it throws up a lot of questions here, around the integrity of Judd Crawford or whether it's a plant, whether it's part of sort of a disguise or costume for infiltration into the 7th Cavalry. Is it some kind of heirloom, or dare I say it, I'm going to throw it onto his wife as well. Is it something to do with his wife? And now that he's gone, she can kind of display it in all its kind of nastiness, I suppose, in the wardrobe.
Maybe, like, the people that were at the wake also throw a little bit of doubt on who Judd Crawford and his wife possibly are. We did see the presidential candidate, Keane, I think his name is. We saw him from the newspaper last episode. We see him being introduced to Angela Barra in this episode here. This is the opposition to Robert Redford, President Robert Redford, the person that brought in the Redfordations to compensate the Tulsa residents who were, and families who were attacked back in 1921. So if she is siding with this candidate Keane, it's possible, as you say, John, that she is a member of the 7th Cavalry or is connected to them, or it's him. Effectively, she's taken his coat and hung it up in a closet, you know, and his coat happens to be the Grand Master of the KKK coat.
Yeah, it's like when you have guests around and you put everyone's coat on the spare bed, except his is a hooded KKK outfit.
Something like that, yes.
Maybe the sheriff's badge, though, is pointing a little more towards Judge Crawford. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, James Woke, who played Keane, he's a big actor now. He's done his time in a lot of TV shows, never really broke into movies, but I can very much see him playing the leader, the bad guy. Mm-hmm. He does it very well in his previous shows.
Yeah, yeah.
So I see that, because he plays the politician, like, all smiles really well.
Yes.
We do see Jane, played by Frances Fisher, saying that she used to work for him. Mm-hmm. So it's very much in some political sense. Now, I am actually leaning towards, and I kind of dismissed it quite easily, and Derek, I'm apologizing, that you thought Judd was some form of mass vigilante. You did think potentially he was DD, he was the second Night Owl.
Dan Dryberg, yes. That's what I thought last episode. And I have a feeling somebody actually commented on a post we put up after just seeing the trailer from The Watchmen, saying that he's drinking out of a mug that has an owl on it as well. So some other indication that possibly this was Night Owl 2 from the original comic book, growing old now and living in a different city. The comic books did actually end with Dan Dryberg and his partner at the time, Silk Spectre, both creating new identities for themselves to go into hiding. So possibly his new identity was Judd Crawford, and he went into hiding by moving out of New York and moving to Tulsa. These are all speculation, of course. We haven't seen any further than this episode, but I still think there's a possibility that this is something that he's doing. I love John's idea that he could possibly be trying to infiltrate the 7th Cavalry with using this really inflammatory KKK outfit. It's either that or he's got a very odd eBay history.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think the other thing as well is that maybe, you know, if it was Will that did string him up, then that could be the reason. Unfortunately, his infiltration double bluff has backfired, and he's actually been thought of as a prominent member of the 7th Cavalry. I don't know. I think the other thing as well about candidate Keane is, you know, at the way he kind of asks Angela, are you police? Again, it's quite a leading question, given that you would think people in politics would also be trying to hide or not reveal the police identity, given that they're allowed to hide their face. And I thought that was quite interesting. I mean, she kind of brushes it off with, I used to be, but I'm now retired. I run a bakery.
Yeah.
But I thought that was an interesting question that would be asked from a prominent public figure, for a police organization where the identity of the officers needs to be kept secret in this new world.
Yeah. What the way where my head is at is that potentially Judd's superhero costume, his previous persona, was hung up in there originally. Like you would have seen the Night Owl kind of, superhero outfit
Yeah.
in there. And someone has removed that and placed the outfit, the KKK Grandmaster outfit, in there to continue and to force Angela to continue her investigation. They're literally leading Angela on a thread. They're trying to get her to investigate further, which actually, Derek, I think this brings you onto, and because I believe it's the person I think who's kind of pulling the strings, or at least helping, brings you onto your point.
Yeah, I think that we just learned a lot about Louis Gossett Jr.'s character in this particular episode. Will, the young kid that we saw in the start of the first episode, his father was in the military, and we get kind of a whole cycle of who he is in this episode, but he is throwing spanners all around the place into whether we can work out who he is. There's moments in here where he says he has superpowers. That says he can move things with his mind. Maybe he's Dr. Manhattan in the skin of this character of Will, you know. He says he's the one that killed Judd Crawford, yet he's in a wheelchair and he's 105 years old. So the chance of him being able to lift Judd Crawford and lynch him and put him on the tree, you know, all of those things are pretty impossible unless he's using superpowers effectively. And all the way through the episode, you're going, yeah, he's just messing with her. He's just messing with Angela about these abilities that he has. But then he escapes and goes across the road to get some eggs and comes back and cooks them for himself in her lair, effectively. So, how's he done all that? How's he gotten out? Who is he? What is it about this character of Will? You know, we do learn a big thing right at the end of the episode. We learn that he is her grandfather, and that's why he wants to get involved with Angela Abar. So we think his name is Will Abar, possibly, that he is connected to her that way, that he is a paternal grandfather. That she didn't know of before now, which is all really interesting to know about. She is descended from people that were attacked during the attacks on Tulsa. But I'm so intrigued by this character and the fact that, as he says, friends in high places, as in a massive spaceship, are able to lift him up and take him away inside a car when he's about to be taken into custody by Angela at the end of the episode. So, he does have friends in high places. Maybe not space. Probably someone driving the Archie, the L-mobile or the L plane, that we saw in episode 1. Probably somebody driving that's lifting the car away. But, just really interesting how he's in her life, who he is and what is it about him.
Well, that's it. That the Owlmobile, effectively Archie, if that is the vehicle that lifted the car and Will away, you know, it may be, you know, it does suggest that possibly Judd Crawford may not be dead. It may be a ruse. It may be, an act. I don't know. He looked pretty dead up on that tree. But I'm just kind of postulating here because I think that the show kind of probably needs that because he is obviously this whole scene of Judd Crawford swinging from the tree with Will in the wheelchair next to him. Like, this is a definitive scene that is effectively now moving the whole story along. It is this, who is Will? Who is he really? You know, we hear that he's taking pills to help with his memory. Well, are they helping with his memory or are they giving him false memories? You know, we don't know how true a lot of this stuff is yet. And I think that's what adds to this great intrigue around who this guy is because, you know, we see him in the flashbacks, where he's trying on his dad's uniform as well. And you're getting a lot of history about this guy, yet there's still so many questions. And I love that. I do like as well one shout out. I thought it was proper smooth. You know, you think Angela is just being nice to an old man in a wheelchair by giving him coffee when she brings him back to the bakery at the start and then immediately just bags it in order so that she can go to, I think it's the Greenwood Center where it kind of talks of the history of the Tulsa massacre in 1921, and checks on his DNA and identity. So I thought that was a really smooth kind of move by her.
Very, very cool move. Yeah. One final thing about this for Will, for me, I loved that opening scene transition between his father receiving the piece of propaganda from the German army, in 1921, receiving that note, and then the transition, as you say, you have young Will trying on his father's outfit and reading out this note that he's received about coloured soldiers in the army and needing to turn on the American army because that America is not for them. Germany will welcome them with open arms, kind of thing. And then the transition to seeing Will sitting in the wheelchair, still holding that piece of paper. How many years now? We're talking like almost 100 years later. He's still got that same piece of paper and still reading it. So to me, it's saying the propaganda that's been used back in those days, Will has always grown up with that piece of propaganda associated with him, constantly reading it as his last reminder of his family that he left behind in Tulsa, when he went and was freed. So what has it done to Will's mind to have this piece of propaganda as being his only living memory of his family for 100 years? So it seems to have turned him against American society, it would seem.
Yeah, I think it's really important. This actually did happen as well. So by 1917, you had almost 400,000 African Americans drafted into the U.S. Army, but they were not allowed to be Marines. There was segregation from the white troops, and they were kind of regularly sort of reminded of their second-class citizenship. And I mean, that's kind of shown here with the guy on the horse spitting down on Will's father, in his uniform. Like in the Navy, they could only be kitchen help hands or cooks. Really? They couldn't be, sailors within the US Navy. And it was this German leaflet drop, was specifically aimed at colored Americans to destroy morale and encourage desertion.
Right.
Saying that, effectively you're treated like crap. Yeah. That's not the case in Germany. It was, those seeds of morale. And I think, again, it's one of those really interesting parts of history, like with Tulsa 1921, that obviously is maybe a little more unregistered within the history books or slightly less told. And I think this is an interesting thing that may be running through, each of the episodes. We don't know yet, but certainly it started off the first two episodes with, fairly prominent historical events for African American people where you may not really know about it or hear about it.
Absolutely.
I'm starting to think of Will as almost like a Professor Xavier type character, or more, say, old man Bruce Wayne from Batman Beyond.
Right. Yeah.
Where he's infirm, in terms of like he cannot lift. He couldn't have lifted Judd and kind of, basically hung him himself.
Yeah.
But I'm starting to think of he is a character who is like a mastermind. He's been around 100 years. He's been planning to destroy the KKK, or in this case, the 7th Cavalry, for years. So he's working on that. So he's rounded up his own army, his own vigilantes to do this, which potentially included, after White Knight, the actual, the police, or in this case, Judd. And when he found Judd dead, he's like, okay, we need to replace Judd. We need someone else who will most likely be the leader of the authorities, which in this case is going to be Angela or Knight. So he's basically he's a puppet master. He's pulling the strings. And, Louis Gossett Jr. plays that role so well, where just the look in his eye when Angela looks at him and he's being spirited away.
Yeah.
Like
the smile on his face where he goes, I told you it was someone, I told you it was people in high places. Yeah. Really interesting. Our doomsday clock is still ticking. We do need to move on to our next big point though, Chris. So what is your big point for the episode?
So one of the big ones for me is the roundup of the suspected 7th Cavalry. And it's only about a 10-minute, kind of scene, but it's starting to show the authorities versus the suspected cavalry, the downtrodden, because it was, Angela says to the Russian that they're not all 7th Cavalry. And he goes, I know, but they'll know who is. So what you do get is this very much show of force by the authorities, by the police, where all of them there in masks, in front of the trailer park. But then you see all of the trailer park residents, or not all of them, some are still inside, their actual homes, but you see a lot of them there, and they start standing up because the Russian incites them towards it. So what we're getting is this, two clashing heads. Now, also, I will say, fantastic scene for action. Like, just seeing everyone do their thing, seeing Sister Knight being able to kind of like spinning back kick a guy in the face, but then she starts to lose it, seeing Looking Glass staying completely out of the fray, but then seeing the complete opposite of that, which is the Russian. I don't think we fully got his name yet as a character. Or as a superhero, vigilante, or officer, if you want to call it, whatever term we're going to use. Him doing this, he was like, I want them, like, I need payback. So seeing him get so into it, it's a very interesting piece, because they go through and they round up a lot of the guys.
Yeah, it certainly is. And with Angela saying, I'm going to stay out of this, I don't want any part of this. And it's only when she's attacked, the minute she's attacked, she almost kills the guy. Yeah. She punches him on the ground. You do see him breathing as she walks away, so you know she hasn't killed him. But it is really interesting, and it does bring up that other question. I know with what the showrunner and writers are trying to do with this show is not say that this is the person that's right. You're following the person that's right. They're definitely giving us a lot of grey in here with Angela and her side, all of the vigilante police officers effectively. Because one of the things that really stood out for me at the end of the episode was, if you think about what's happened to them, they were attacked during White Night. They're now masked, yes, and they're now police force, yes, but all of the police people retired. They all left the service, is what we're told, and all of these people are effectively almost vigilantes, sort of legal. Maybe they're not legal. Maybe they have just taken back up the fight as vigilantes. Maybe they're members of their group that were never police officers at this stage, you know, so there is a little bit of grey on their side as well as everything else. What I find also quite interesting is the politics of it. We have a group on one side, which is the 7th Cavalry, which are just being painted as racists. And we have the people on the other side that support what happened in Tulsa and the Redfordations. They're under President Redford. And what we see here at the 7th Cavalry's home, this caravan park basically, is they're under the idol of Nixon, under the idol of Richard Nixon. So it's a choice of two political parties, not a choice of two belief systems. It's two political parties that they're sitting under, which I think is really interesting. Yeah,
this was really good. I love that word, the Russian character played by Andrew Howard. I still don't know if I know his name. Well, I don't at this moment in time, but I love that he goes, you know, we'll give you to 5, and if not, we'll pull down your idol, as they kind of wrap the harness around this, idol of Nixon. And I think that speaks to the partisanship of American politics at the moment. You have this at the moment between Republican and Democrats, of whoever is in charge, that it's become highly polarized, highly partisan, and no one listens to one another. And you have this absolutely encapsulated with this retaliation on the cavalry. And I think what makes it really visceral is the fact it comes from them taking down their chief of police, Judd Crawford, from the tree, who seems to have been up there swinging in the wind for an age because of all the forensic stuff that's had to be done. And I think that's it. You know, you have the Russian really going for it. You have both Looking Glass and Sister Knight really holding back. And I must say there was a line just before, back at the lynching tree, where Sister Knight goes, as always, you're cold as glass, to Looking Glass. And he goes, then why am I crying under here? And I thought that was really, really a great line, because I think, you know, his face is truly hidden under that mask. And
we even see him in front of the TV just eating dinner with the mask still on as well, which I think is quite interesting. Tim Blake Nelson, obviously a very famous actor as well, so you'd expect him to have the mask off quite often. Doesn't in this episode, which I thought was quite interesting.
So I liked just how it ramped up here. Yeah. You know, how, again, as you say, these little things just ramp up the tension and the pressure.
Absolutely. And one final thing for me on this bit, if we're going to pretend that Damon Lindelof was speaking the truth when he was saying he wasn't talking about the real world politics, one thing to mention is, as we've said before, Richard Nixon was in power for a significant amount of longer period of time in the America of the Watchmen comic books. I think it's somewhere in the region of about 20 years he was in power. of the US, something that's impossible in real life. You can only be in power for 2 terms, effectively, but he broke the mold, and I think he might have been maybe 3 or 4 terms in office in the comic book. So you can understand that he's built up this cult of worship from these characters, just purely in the comic book universe. So we're just going to pretend that it's not a real world allegory specifically about politics in America at the moment.
Yes.
we got to take them at their word, right?
Exactly.
Sure. Why not? But I think it probably is.
So I think it's about time we move on to our next main point. So that means the doomsday clock has been set to 4 minutes.
The doomsday clock has been set to 4 minutes to midnight.
So John, do you want to give us your medium point now?
Yes, mine is, I do not endorse this production. This is The Hooded Justice, An American Hero. I really enjoyed this. I don't know what I was expecting from this scene when you have the 4 guys walking towards the sort of convenience store, putting on the handkerchief over their face. Again, another mask, loading their guns to go and effectively rob this convenience store. But I loved Hooded Justice coming in and being bloody, bolshy and irreverent. I really liked that. I really liked, just how, you get that kind of terms and conditions that, this has, racist language. Will be show depictions of violence. This will be, sort of abusive in a way to literally every section of society. That it's not endorsed at all. This view of, an American hero, this hooded justice. So I really enjoyed this scene. And I thought the whole action, in this scene was really good. So, this is my meeting point because again, the Hooded Justice is one of those characters that's always been there in the comics, as well as, in the movie as well. But you only really, obliquely get to know about the Hooded Justice. So it was good to get, this character sort of having his moment saving the convenience store, in a roundabout way. Yes, he gets rid of the 4, robbers, but he's kind of a bit of an arse about it, really, in the end, to literally everyone. So I really enjoyed, this rescue by the Hooded Justice.
Yes, Hooded Justice, one of the earliest of the superheroes. He's probably been around first. I think he was the first person to put on the mask and inspired a bunch of other people, and one of the main members of the Minutemen, the first superhero group as well. Yeah.
So what I find really interesting is the take when we see the Hooded Justice talking, saying, and we see his body washing away, and he goes, "That's not really me, but I needed everyone to think that was me."
Yes, exactly. Do you feel the voiceover is a little bit like Rorschach's voiceover?
Yes, exactly.
I got that.
I'm more going, so one of the core parts of the original comics books was the comic within the comic. And actually what we see is that the theme of the comic within the comic was always kind of somewhat reflecting some of the core themes of the Watchmen universe and what was happening in each of those issues. What I'm starting to wonder, is this what's also happening in Tulsa? In that someone has said they are dead. And now, John, this kind of leads back to your Judd piece. Potentially someone has said they died because they wanted the world to think they were dead so they could do what needed to be done.
Okay, maybe.
Now, is this Judd or is this potentially Rorschach? Is this, because there was definitely there's definitely a direct link between Rorschach, keeping his mask on, pulling it up and eating, and Looking Glass.
Absolutely.
Doing that. And you said it's strange to see that actor and that character at home having his dinner with just a mask.
Absolutely. And as we say, the Rorschach mask itself was supposed to reveal something about the person that looked at the mask. The Looking Glass mask is effectively a mirror mask that people look at and see their own reflection in it as he interrogates them. So those two things are massively similar. The idea of looking at it and seeing yourself reflected back, definitely. So yeah, I definitely see that. I do love that line from Hooded Justice, this documentary that's being made where he's going and people ask me, "Who are you?" And he goes, "If I knew who that was, I wouldn't be wearing the effing mask, would I?" I think that's really good.
That was great.
Massively violent though. And I think one of the things about that costume that we have in Hooded Justice, it's definitely one that worked really well in the comic books. You could see what was going on with the noose and with the hood and that outfit. And then we saw it in live action for very, very short amount of time in the Zack Snyder movie. Seeing it in action here in this ultra violent scene, I actually thought it worked very well. I love the reactions of everybody around as he's taking out each of the people that are trying to rob this shop. As he gets more and more brutal, they're all kind of like, giving him a little bit of applause in their own little way and really happy to see Hooded Justice. And then he starts smacking the guy's head off the counter and then breaks his head with the cash register on top of it to finish his brutality. And everybody in there is disgusted by how violent he's gone, really.
Yeah, it's really violent. I mean, the whole thing is, but yeah, he doesn't hold back, shall we say. And again, to me, there's a little bit of Rorschach in that as well. And I like what you're saying, Chris, about this idea of having the body wash up, pretending it's him, and you're getting these flashbacks. So you're starting to wonder what's real, what's imagined, what's the story within the story that feeds into the current story. I mean, it was even with the flashback to the White Knight, it was kind of like how that worked in all of this. And I know we'll come to that in a minute, but it's also about the individual people. Who is it? Who are these people really? Are they who they say they are? Or is it just different people behind the mask, taking forward, what the previous person who held that mask believed, carrying on their work, this idea of having multiple people inhabit the idea that's presented by the mask. So I think that's really good.
Maybe, and as you mentioned, Chris, the Black Friday comic book, comic books were very popular in the late 70s, early 80s when this book was being written. And we see in this, everybody is sitting down in front of the TV to watch American Hero Story and see the story of Hooded Justice. This is a very central thing. So I think you might be right about that little reference to the connection between the Black Friday comic book and Hooded Justice on TV, the American Hero story as well.
Yeah. So, I think that kind of ties up the American Hero story. Derek, because John did briefly mention it, would you like to go on and talk about your point?
Yeah, my middle point, my medium-sized point for the episode really is the White Knight, the attack on Christmas Eve, because I think it's just filmed so well and gives so much information about why the police force are now the way they are, I suppose. So we see Angela and her husband at home on Christmas Eve having that really funny conversation where he's going, the clock is at 2 minutes to midnight and he's going, in 2 minutes, I'm opening up that present, Angela. He's kind of saying to her, I don't like surprises. It's Christmas Day then. Once again, midnight figuring in quite significantly into this TV series. And then the 7th Cavalry break through the door and shoot at her. Really interestingly, she takes out one of them, gets his gun, and the other guy is apparently standing over her, got her dead to rights, and she's unconscious on the floor, but she wakes up in hospital alive afterwards, right? So putting a little bit of fuel to John's theory that maybe Judd is involved with these guys. She wakes up with her former chief standing over in the hospital, watching over when her husband's gone away. But is there more behind that? Is it more that she didn't get shot because he wanted to keep her alive? He was the other person that was behind that 7th Cavalry mask. And when the person he went into the house with got killed, maybe he decided, well, I'm not going to kill her myself. Something like that. We'll see as the episodes go on. But there is so much in this. Like we hear there were 40 other homes all attacked on the same night, including her partner who lost his life with his wife as they were asleep in bed waiting for Christmas Day to come. And that's where we find out about Angela and her husband getting the kids that aren't hers, as Looking Glass so horribly puts it. She's adopted effectively her partner's 3 kids to live in her home with her.
Yeah, and also Judd Crawford does seem pretty beat up there. So again, what's the reality here with Judd Crawford?
Yeah.
He's kind of a twisty-turny kind of a character. He's been portrayed as that. But yeah, I wondered why she hadn't been shot in the face. I thought we were going to see her husband come in and save her, and maybe that's all that happened. We just didn't see it, but she survives that White Knight Christmas, the Santa Baby flashback.
Absolutely. I love actually how they do that as well, the Santa Baby song playing, and that actually gets slower as the attack's going on. The actual record that's being played slows down as the attack's going on, which doesn't happen obviously in the actual song. So it was obviously a choice of the people who were doing the music for the episode to slow it down to accentuate what's happening in the scene. I think it's beautifully done. Really good scene.
Yeah, I loved everything about this. This gave us so much more information about White Knight, and explaining how it all went down. As you said, it was the full, complete police force was attacked.
Yes.
With only a handful remaining of the 40. So you would expect Tulsa maybe having just around 40, 50 police officers.
Maybe.
Because it's not like Dallas, or it's not a massive city, in comparison. So you could see it having a more sheriff's police force.
And I do think the point is made by Crawford that not only were 40 people attacked on the same night, all the other police officers are handing in their notice or handing in their retirement papers to leave. So even though the force may be significantly larger than that, it's had enough of an effect to make police officers step back and go, I don't want my family killed over this. I'm out, kind of thing. So maybe the force now is that room that we saw in episode 1 with the probably only 50 or 60 officers who are all masked. Maybe that's all that is the police force in Tulsa now. But it may have started at a much bigger level. And now it's just people that are willing to put on the mask, because Angela instantly says, even though she's still in bed 3 days after being attacked, she instantly says, well, I'm not giving up. I'm here. And he says to her, Crawford says to her, well, if you're staying, I'm staying, kind of thing. So, so there is some members of the organization that this has actually served to galvanize against them. And there's other members that have left effectively. So it does give a huge setup for who these characters are in the police force of Tulsa.
It does. And it's very much answering 2 questions, posing 8 more.
Of course.
Yeah. The pilot first episode was very much just a setup. And now we're getting little pieces of information, but it's just posing so many more. And I was like, oh no, but why? Why have that person just stand over her? Like, now I'm going to have to wait until episode 8 to find out what really happened there. No, I'm not complaining. I'm just being Irish and complaining about it for the sake of complaining.
So what you're saying is that it's a Damon Lindelof television show then?
Exactly. Like, who would have known?
Who would have known that, 6 seasons of Lost, 3 seasons of The Leftovers, who would have known that he would pose questions that he isn't going to answer in the same episode?
No, it's terrible.
But really good. There is another couple of things that were going on. Chris, you have some questions about the tech that's used for your medium point, yeah?
Yeah, so this is just really starting to become interesting for me because we see, we posed that potentially it was just the police force that had access to this more high-tech, advanced technology. But I don't think that's the case anymore. I'm wondering if it's a lot more openly available. Now, I don't mean legally, but just openly available than we expected. Because, first of all, we see, yes, potentially the Owlmobile, Archie, taking Will, or at least some form of that. So a hovering UFO-like event that took with a massive electromagnet that can lift a car.
Yeah. I think you actually mentioned last episode that you think that this might be something they made off the plans of Archie. Maybe there's multiple ones made, because we did see in that first episode, remember, Judd Crawford was in what we thought was the Archie vehicle and it crashed to the ground. So unless somebody's been tinkering with it and fixing it up and has made it be able to be flown the following day, it's unlikely to be the same model, but it could be another model of the same thing, that the technology is out there since, it was 30 years ago when Night Owl was flying that around the city of New York. So maybe it's out there.
Exactly. And that's what I'm starting to think. I think it's more readily available for all the different police forces, for blah, blah, blah. We also see Angela's X-ray goggles, which is very much a Night Owl thing that seems to have been co-opted. again, just like using it looked very much like the Night Owl hood or the bionicles that were used, and she could zoom in and out and the depth was changed.
So 2 pieces of Night Owl equipment in Judd Crawford's police officers and police force. I think you might be proving my little idea that could have been Dan Dryberg.
Potentially, but what starts to throw it off then is the news reporters, the film crew at the crime scene.
I know. That was hilarious.
2 cameramen essentially wearing a pair like moth wings,
Yeah.
floating, and we see that they're being shot down like drones.
Yes, exactly.
It was just really interesting because we keep getting these flashes that, yes, this is 2019, but it's an alternate take. We already know the history is an alternate take, but also the technological advances are an alternate take.
Yeah, maybe Arthur from The Tick has moved over into the Watchmen universe and lent everybody his moth wings.
Yeah, so who knows?
But it does feel realistic, doesn't it? I know the tech is a bit weird and the guys are carrying these massive cameras effectively, but it does feel realistic given how many drones are being used with cameras on them to capture footage for movies and TV shows and the news as well. You know, it does feel realistic that if you had tech that had a pair of wings and could fly a news reporter over the top of a place they're not supposed to be in, that they would absolutely use it to get this footage and put it on TV. It feels realistic in a way, you know.
And of course you have in the, the Greenwood Centre, they have that hologram aspect, for the displays in that centre, like you get in Star Wars as well. So, I thought that was pretty cool.
Help me, Chief Judd Crawford, you're my only hope, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Really interesting. I also love that whole thing of doing the DNA test in the Crawford Centre as well, where they go, and your name is, and she goes, Will. And there's no other verification at all. She just says her name is Will, even though clearly from the DNA sample, it's a male sample, right?
I'm Will.
But I do like that. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah. No, so that was my main kind of secondary point. It's just that I'm interested to see where they continue to take this tech now.
Absolutely, yeah. And interesting if it's all to do with Night Owl. Has he been involved in the creation of all of this tech, or Adrian Veidt possibly somewhere creating some of this tech for the world? I did notice this episode, definitely, I think we might have mentioned it in the first episode, but I definitely noticed it in this episode, all the electric cars that are driving around. Every car seems to be electric. So definitely a change from where we are right now. Most cars are petrol with a couple of electric cars, maybe every 4th or 5th one kind of thing. This is certainly, electric cars have pervaded in the world much more than they are currently as we speak, I suppose.
Yes, but speaking of the impending climate disaster, let's get to 3 minutes to midnight.
The doomsday clock has been set to 3 minutes to midnight.
Yeah, our small point, a small thing about the episode that we want to talk about. John, do you want to take this off? Because I think we might actually have a similar point. But John, your small point about the episode.
Yeah, it's the strange stagehands. You have the many faces of Mr. Phillips, and you have the multiple faces of Miss Crookshanks. Yes, I think Chris mentioned it for the first episode, this idea of maybe clones, androids possibly, bionics, or just multiple sets of twins like Dolly the sheep, but I suppose that is a clone. So yeah, clones. But we have all the stagehands, all the actors on stage doing this play, that are all Mr. Phillips and Miss Crookshanks. And unfortunately, one of the Mr. Phillips really has a pretty brutal end, where fire in the hold, really is fire in the hold. It didn't seem as though there was much, special effects with that one.
No.
He did literally light up Mr. Phillips here.
And what I thought was interesting, that first moment where you have Jeremy Irons repeating what we saw in episode 1. He's getting the cake delivered to him at his table again, but this time he has absolutely no time for him. He's like, yeah, get on with it, right? I want to go down and do this play again. Now I want real tears tonight, Miss Crookshanks. So you're wondering how many times has she performed this play with the death of Mr. Phillips over and over again every night, as they try to perfect this play. I guess that's what they're doing. Really brutal, really awful, and I hope they're clones, not twins, John. You know, twins are real things in real life.
No, exactly.
So clones, possibly.
Yeah. And I thought what was most disturbing was that one of the Mr. Phillips was called Montrose, was being called Montrose, and he wanted to become Mr. Phillips, who he must know will be in the next rendition of this play, given a fairly large amount of pork crackling in the fire hole. So I was like going, basically, you're just suicidal, Montrose, because you want to become this new Mr. Phillips.
Well, now Montrose challenged Jeremy Irons' character, and Jeremy Irons says, "Do you want to be the next Mr. Phillips?" So it's very much like oh, that guy's just annoyed me, right? He's gonna be the guy I burn to death in this furnace tomorrow night. Like it's really violent. And, we had this discussion about the posters advertising Jeremy Irons' role in the show. And this is actually, if you don't mind me also bringing in my point for this part, we saw the posters of Jeremy Irons saying he is exactly who you think he is, and everybody thinks he's Adrian Veidt, that he's Ozymandias from the original graphic novel. Even on IMDb, he's listed as Ozymandias and Adrian Veidt. I am suddenly going, is this actually John Osterman inside the mind of Dr. Manhattan trying to break out? This crazy, messed up guy that has been stuck inside the mind of the super being for the last 40 years, 50, 60 years even, since this accident happened to him. And this is why he's building this play, effectively. We have that really weird moment where he comes up on his horse to a tree and plucks what you think is an apple out of it and actually turns out to be a tomato. Well, that's not in the real world, is it? So,
yeah, that was actually one of my points.
There you go.
I was going to actually comment on that because you had talked about this potential non-real world scenario, where maybe like in the mind of or VR, etc. But then with the reveal of what I'm assuming are clones.
Right.
I don't think they're androids. I think this is clones.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if, Jeremy Irons, Ozymandias is basically genetically altering things. So the tomato tree is an apple tree that grows tomatoes, and it's one because he likes the taste of tomatoes.
Yeah.
So he has grown that himself. I'm wondering if they're going to change part of the creation of Dr. Manhattan.
Okay.
That Ozymandias had a hand in it. Or that there is more to it. Like, it doesn't make sense right now why he would be so enraptured by the creation of Dr. Manhattan.
And he would have been, I don't think he would have even been born when this happened to John Osterman, right? Because that happened in 1947. Gosh, I should have written down what was on that signpost at the back, and it might have been the 40s or 50s. And Adrian Veidt, Ozymandias, was around in 1980s. So he shouldn't, maybe his father had a hand in it, but I don't think the actual character of Adrian Veidt was around when it originally happened to Dr. Manhattan. Which is making me suddenly question, maybe they were messing with us. As you said, Chris, last episode, maybe they were messing with us. He's exactly who you think he is. Well, as long as you think he is who he is, because he's not if you don't think that.
Or could it be a split personality?
Mm-hmm.
So we hear that Dr. Manhattan cannot change his skin.
Yeah.
So could it be a fractured personality of Dr. Manhattan who is now Ozymandias?
That's why I'm thinking it's John Osterman inside the mind of Dr. Manhattan. I don't think it's Adrian Veidt, Ozymandias at all. I think that was a marketing campaign messing with us.
All this is interesting for me.
Yeah.
It's just one of the most interesting parts is how this is going to feed into the main storyline.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's nothing in what this character is doing. There is nothing in the stuff around him.
Yeah.
There is nothing, like writing a paper or anything like that. There's nothing there.
Yeah. And we don't even know if it's in the real world. We know it's even filmed in a different country. It's filmed in Wales, when the main body of this is being filmed in Georgia in the US. So all the Jeremy Irons stuff is in a completely different world effectively right now. So will it tie together? How will it tie together as the rest of the show goes on? And I think I'm going to resign myself to calling him Jeremy Irons from now on, because I really, right now in the second episode, I have no idea who the character is. I think it might be John Osterman though.
But one of the potentially interesting things is, I have friends in high places.
Mm-hmm.
We hear Will say that,
mm-hmm.
right? Posturing, just questioning, could Will be referring to Jeremy Irons.
You do have that feeling? Yeah.
Yeah.
I have he is
yeah.
the mastermind because he was the mastermind of everything else. Is he the mastermind behind this? And Will has been 109 years old because he's cloned.
Maybe.
Or there's some form of it there that is being helped aged with him. Genetics are working out. Those pills are keeping him alive because his clone body is dying.
Exactly.
There's so many questions to it.
It's that thing. We're told so many things, and yet we can't be sure whether they're correct. As I was saying, and like you've brought here, Chris, are those pills really for his memory, or is it for his memory because he is some kind of creation?
Maybe.
And yes, I suppose even, just coming back to what you said earlier, even androids, maybe dream of electric sheep.
Perhaps. It's fascinating. You can see from that being all of our point, that final point. I know we said it's our small point, but all three of us have chosen that weird moment where we see the stage play. We also see a giant naked blue guy. So,
yes,
nice reference back to the comic there, obviously, when we have the creation of Dr. Manhattan there with Mr. Phillips. So we do get everything here in this scene. Why is the character of Jeremy Irons so obsessed by something that must have happened 60 or 70 years ago if he wasn't involved in some way? Whether he is John Osterman, whether he is Dr. Manhattan, personified as a human, as we heard the mention that he can't do that. Maybe he can now. Maybe that's what he's been working on for 30 years while he's been off on Mars, getting to look like a human, and he's put himself in the body of Jeremy Irons and has broken his brain or something.
It's the obsession of the mind being played out, and eventually it will pull back and we'll be on Mars.
Mm-hmm.
Or will we?
But
gentlemen, I do hear the doomsday clock again.
The doomsday clock is now at 2 minutes. I repeat, 2 minutes to midnight.
So, this is our final point. Just kind of any last minute notes, some Easter eggs, common connections that you noticed, gents? Anything for you guys?
Loads.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly for me, I love the typewriter at the start, typing out Watchmen in the font. Sad, I know, but I really like that.
Font fan John.
Yeah. And I love Topher's floating Meccano set that he was doing. It was just like, what is going on here? Again, of this world, but very different. And I kind of quite like that.
Absolutely. And I definitely wanted some kind of explanation for it. It looked like when I watched it the second time, the first time I was like, hang on a second, does he have superpowers? And he's using them to build this cathedral out of Meccano, effectively. And then I noticed there's a kind of a pad underneath. There's like a metal pad, a black pad underneath. It could be metal. It could be Magnus that's raising it up. But he gets frustrated and allows the thing to just disintegrate on the floor, which
he
obviously
throws it across the room.
Yeah, but he instantly resets himself. Did you notice how quickly he goes, can I go and watch TV? You know, he instantly has that second of anger and then instantly resets himself to go and can I watch some TV now, as if he's back to normal. So I don't know. It felt like they were saying he has some form of powers. And then you're kind of going, oh no, there's going to be a real world explanation for this in the future because nobody has powers except for Dr. Manhattan, right? So,
correct.
So I'm intrigued to see how we get that played out, but it is something completely otherworldly, as you said, John.
Yeah. And also just coming back to the earlier point, Andrew Howard's character is Red Scare.
Ah, very good. Very good. That's the Russian.
Yes.
Very good, John. Thank you very much for that one. I think there's a couple of really big things that happen in this episode. Chris, you were talking a little bit about Black Freighter, the comic book, from the original Watchmen comics. I definitely think we see the newspaper vendor that's in this episode in Tulsa. Yep. We see the newspaper headlines on the front of the New Frontiersman. The New Frontiersman is where Rorschach sent his diary, his description of everything that went on to be published. So the New Frontiersman is still going 30 years later. The headline that's on the New Frontiersman is Global Squid Falls Baffle Scientists. They've happened in 4 different cities across the globe, effectively. So interestingly, this is something that will play out about the giant squid from back in the 80s, now manifesting as squid rainfall, effectively, around the world. Definitely both nods to the comic. But I also think the newspaper vendor is a nod to Bernard, the guy who sold the newspapers in the center of New York. He was present throughout all of the book, and he took his cues for his belief from everything you read in the newspapers. Yet you have this guy, this newspaper seller, effectively saying, I don't believe a thing that comes out of these newspapers, which I think is a little flip on it. And we see the young kid coming up and collecting her set of newspapers. is this a commentary on the fact that everybody now reads the news as if it's like comic books? Because in the comics, Bernie was the kid that read Black Fighter at the newsstand. Is this kid coming up and reading the newspaper like it's a comic book, effectively, because it's as exciting as comic books used to be now to read the news?
Or there's so many lies in papers these days. It's not reporting news, it's reporting opinion or spin.
Yeah.
That actually it's like a work of fiction.
Absolutely.
So I'm wondering, it's a character we haven't been introduced to yet, right? Because that's a new child. We haven't seen her before.
Yeah.
And the vendor basically asks, does she really read all of these?
Yes. Yeah.
So, and it's a white van, it's a white SUV, but it looks somewhat armored.
Maybe.
So I'm curious to see if potentially this is someone else. This is someone who we haven't met yet that basically has a daughter who is basically her slave, kind of. I don't know how that worked, but essentially the woman doesn't get out of her car. She's too important. She basically pulled the child to go collect those things every morning.
Right.
And she reads every single word in them.
Maybe trying to search for something like that. But as I say, the costuming of the kid that collects the newspapers is almost exactly the same as the 1980s costume of Bernie who sat there and read the Black Friday, which I just think is a nice nod. Yeah. So maybe we'll never see her again. But I did like that little touch of the two of them speaking to each other was similar to the comic book.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely wondered, like yourself, Chris, who is this girl? But yeah, I think it's more going to be that reference to the newsstand, and also just a shout out to the fact that the newsstand guy is Robert Wisdom, who was in The Wire. He was Bunny, the precinct chief, I think, where he creates New Holland with all the drugs being legal. But that was a nice little touch.
Yeah, it was cool to see him in there. I know you even mentioned last episode, John, that your favorite thing that HBO have ever done is The Wire. That's where it all started for you, really, with your love affair with HBO. So interested to see the character appear here. A couple of other quick things, if you don't mind. I'm sure you have one or two, Chris, as well. Almost back to back with one of the other shows that we covered on The Boys, we had a special appearance by Uncle Bobby from Supernatural. And he appears here as well. He is also another uncle in here. This time making a wonderful line where Angela goes, look, there's so much going on in the city here. Could we just take a rain check or something? And he goes, I can have a real check to clear out of here, basically. Give me some of that Redfordations, effectively. So seems to be involved more in the 7th Cavalry than in Angela's side of life. Seems to be a bit of an abrasive character. So hopefully we'll see Jim Beaver back later in the series. But really cool to see this cameo of Uncle Bobby once again on another show.
So just a very short one. It may be nothing. It may be something. Essentially, when we see Angela inputting her code in her bat cave or in her sister night cave, it looks like it's 1980. And then I'm pretty sure it's a 5, which is an Easter egg to the release of the original Watchmen comic, the year it was released.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's been blocked from my view. In everything, if you just assume where her fingers go, the logical step is the 5. So it will be interesting. I'm assuming at some point they'll zoom in on it, and that will be the Easter egg, for the show or for that episode. But if it is what I think it is, it's a nice nod.
Interesting. Something else we've learned in this episode, fellow watchers, don't ever buy anything with credit card when Chris is over your shoulder behind you, because he will work out your PIN number.
Absolutely.
What do you mean, impressive. 5432?
Damn it, Chris, don't tell everybody. One final note we wanted to mention, because the name of the episode being Martial Feats of Comanche Horsemanship, it would be weird if we didn't mention the painting that they linger on quite a bit in the house of Judd Crawford. The painting shows 2 Native Americans on horseback being attacked by 2 other Native Americans. I could tell the difference because the Comanche horsemanship that's on show is effectively the people who are being attacked are hiding on the other side of their horses while spears are being thrown at them. So need to know what that means in the context of this show and in the context of this episode, but it's effectively using all of your abilities to avoid being caught or being killed. So wonder what that means as the episodes go on. If you have any ideas what it means, watchers, or anything within the episode, of course, send in your feedback. Email us at feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com with your thoughts about the episodes and anything you may have caught that we didn't catch.
Yes.
Oh, one final Easter egg that I noticed after watching the episode one more time after recording the podcast. I just couldn't not include it in here on our Easter egg section. The Hiroshima Lovers, which is a bit of graffiti, otherwise known as the Atomic Kiss. It's a bit of graffiti that they used to use in the actual comic book that Alan Moore drew. It's of two lovers, a man and a woman, embracing just before a bomb drops, effectively. It's called the Atomic Kiss sometimes, or the Hiroshima Kiss. It's used in the comic book by Alan Moore multiple times to designate that there is an impending doom coming with a possible drop of an atomic bomb. In the show, this is the first time I've seen it, it's where Angela's dressed up as Sister Night, leaving in her Batmobile, I guess, or her Sister Nightmobile, just before we get to the newspaper seller that I mentioned earlier on in the Easter eggs here. On the wall, as she's driving out of her lair, I suppose, it has this image on the wall. Just check it out. It's about 9 minutes into the episode, but check it out. Very cool to see it translated into the TV show. I just thought it was kind of cool. I'm wondering if I missed one in episode 1, and look out for it in all the future episodes of the show as well. Back to the rest of our podcast.
But I think that wraps up our total review of this episode. So just to kind of put a nice bow on it, John, what did you think of this episode overall?
I really liked it. To me, this just added so much to what I think is going to come and what's just been. It's got intrigue, it's got mystery, you've got doubt. There's nothing is sure here, I think. And that's what I'm really liking about it. At the moment, it feels like I've just jumped out of a plane and I'm yet to open my parachute.
Nice.
And you're still swirling around, falling a bit. And you're just trying to make these connections. Will they pan out? Will they won't? Or are we completely way off the mark? So the intrigue, the mystery and all that, and the doubt and uncertainty, literally about everyone, I think, is really, really good. I'm finding it absolutely exhilarating and really exciting. So I really enjoyed this episode. I give this 4 blue members out of 5 for sure, in reference to the Blue Man Group headed by Dr. Manhattan and his refinery.
Excellent.
What about yourself, Derek?
I love this episode, but I absolutely will repeat, I ended it saying the exact phrase that Angela said at the end of the episode. WTF is going on? I have no idea. How are we going to podcast about this? Because all I want to do is watch the next episode and find out what actually everything means. I don't know who anybody is. I don't know who I can trust. Even Angela seems a little bit untrustworthy in here because she gets so violent the second she's attacked that she goes way beyond the parameters you'd normally put in a member of the police force, you know? So everybody seems under question for me right now, which is great. That's what I love about these kind of shows. You know, it's something exciting and interesting to talk about. So yeah, really up there with the first episode and really excited to see the third one next week as well. Chris, what about yourself?
Yeah, I'm not even going to lie about it. I'm completely enthralled by this show. It's captured a lot of the threads of what made the comic book so enthralling for me. It posing questions. You just want to consume everything about it. And what I found one of the best parts of this is that it's done at a standard of just the cinematography, the composition of the music, the overall acting. Like, it's a HBO level show. Oh, yeah. And I don't mean that as other shows couldn't have done this, but they've really rolled out the carpet. The way the composers, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, the guys from Nine Inch Nails, have pulled together the music. It's like just beautiful. It's haunting in parts, it's thumping in others.
I think, John, you pointed out that there's some of the songs that the guys have done seem to pull a little bit on the former songs of Nine Inch Nails.
Yeah,
as well.
there's a theme that runs through on the piano that is very reminiscent of some of the Nine Inch Nail themes. I think one being Closer on the piano. It's really, it feels like he's riffing on that in parts.
The outro to Closer,
the
piano
outro,
piece. Yeah, absolutely. I think Right Where I Belong, or Right Where We Belong, I think is one of the tunes that they've kind of used bits of. It's something that Trent Reznor does do quite a lot. He had his album Ghosts, which was about 3 or 4 hours of instrumental music that he did. He has these really interesting themes. It was one of the things he did to kind of sell himself as someone that could do soundtracks effectively. So really intriguing. And you're right, Chris, it does kind of unnerve you at times throughout the episode, exactly at the right points that you want to be unnerved. The music kind of nudges you over the edge, which is cool.
Yeah. I really want to call out Nicole Kassell's direction and the choice of shots. You could have done it a million ways, but when the four characters are pulling Judge down from, or at least like gently removing him from the tree, the decision to focus in on Angela at that angle and then morph it to the White Knight.
Oh, beautiful.
It was
she's
just
talking to her husband, yeah.
But just the choice of all these shots and the close-ups and it was just so well done. And then the one that's really stuck with me, and I don't know why, is the slightly focused and out of focus shifting on the pill bottles when we're in the Sister Knight's cave with Will. The Will is in the background, and then we see the pill bottle there, and it was just so well done.
Yeah.
I'll very much wrap up by saying we joked about it, but this is a Damon Lindelof show. Every time we're getting an answer, 50 more are being posed.
Yeah, definitely with you there, Chris, on that great kind of shot as they're pulling the chief of police down, and she says, "I let you down," as they're letting him down, and then into the White Christmas, White Knight slaughter Christmas. That was a real great shot, definitely.
Yeah. And as you say, Chris, it is a Damon Lindelof show, and that focusing and non-focusing of the pill bottles, that's either pay attention to this or pay attention to this while we're doing something over here in the background that you're not paying attention to.
Exactly.
Which I love. You can't tell with his shows until you see the full season. You can't tell what bits you were supposed to be focused on, which I love. So, always good.
Yeah. But gentlemen, I think that about wraps up everything. Fellow watchers, thank you so much for joining us. Be on the lookout for our feedback podcast, Bulletin of Our Atomic Watchers.
See, I kept the name, John.
Yeah. Great one.
Before our review of episode 3 next week. And don't forget, we want to hear your feedback, be it vocally or just in writing. So if you want to go to tvpodcastindustry.com and leave us a voicemail, we'll make sure your dulcet tones join us in the bulletin, or just actually send your feedback to feedback@tvpodcastindustry.com. Don't forget, even if you don't want to do either of those things, you can still join us on our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/tvpodcastindustries. And jump into the spoiler cast posts where we'll be talking everything we can about the episode. But we really do want to make this very much a community Lost-like, kind of feedback areas, because we know we all think one thing, 3 things, 5 things. We want to hear what you think Damon's doing. We want to hear what we think this series is going, this episode is going. Pose some questions, answer some questions. Throw some random theories out, because I personally love those.
Yeah. And tell us when we're wrong as well, because we're coming at it from one perspective, remember? So we're all talking about these episodes and thinking what we think is right and thinking this is what our ideas are going on to these episodes. If you've seen something that completely contradicts what we've seen, please email us. Please let us know what you thought. We'd love to hear from everyone that's listening to the podcast. Our cutoff time for weekly feedback is Wednesday at 2 minutes to midnight GMT, which is 1 p.m. Wednesday Central Europe, 7 a.m. Wednesday for US East Coast, and 4 a.m. Wednesday for US West Coast, and also 10 p.m. in Melbourne, Australia, right?
Yep.
Let us know your thoughts. Send them in to us, and we will talk about them on our next podcast, our feedback podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, don't forget, if you haven't yet, subscribe to our podcast or tvpodcastindustry.com for all the links and everywhere you can find us. We'll be back on Monday, the 4th of November for Watchmen episode 3. She was killed by space junk. John, do you want to give us a bit of the official synopsis for this episode?
Yeah, sure. Following a late-night visit from the senator, FBI agent Laurie Blake heads to Tulsa to take over the recent murder investigation. The Lord of the Manor receives a harshly worded letter and responds accordingly.
Ooh, the Lord of the Manor, you see? They're not even naming him in the synopsis of the show.
Who is the Lord of the Manor? The Palace, maybe. The Glass Palace.
Maybe.
He's exactly who you think he is.
Exactly. And Laurie here seems to be Silk Spectre, or Laurie Just Spec Check, taking her father Eddie Blake's or the comedian's surname. So that will be an interesting addition into this series, for sure. But just to close out, fellow watchers, remember, you can subscribe and support our podcast through TV Podcast Industries by sharing, with friends, rating us, leaving a review on any podcast catcher of your choice. That would be great. And also now we have a Patreon account where you can also support the podcast if you wish. For all your support, we thank you absolutely. And it is over on Patreon at patreon.com/TV Podcast Industries.
That's it.
Yes, thank you so much, watchers. For now, keep watching The Watchmen. Watch the skies, because you never know when a big, massive electromagnet may steal your car.
Absolutely. Oh no, mine's just gone.
I do kind of feel like I'm past, present, and future all at the same time right now.
Thank you so much for listening, fellow watchers. As always, keep watching, keep listening. Bye.